Welcome, boys and girls. What I'm going to show you here is our lesson 1.1, which asks us how we can describe the relationship between two place value positions. What you see down here are base 10 blocks, and what they're representing is the relationship between the place value positions. Here we have this one cube that's going to represent our ones place, and here's our tens block to represent the tens place, and our hundreds block to represent the hundreds place, and the thousands block to represent the thousands place. And what you should be able to see here from the size of the base 10 blocks is, as we go from the smaller place to the greater place, it increases by 10 times. Here we have the ones place, and if we take this 1 and we multiply it by 10, we get our tens place. 1 times 10 equals 10. And when we go from the tens place to the hundreds place, if we take this 10, we multiply it by 10, we have the 100. That's how we have our hundreds place. And if we take this 100 and multiply that by 10, we have our 1,000, which is our thousands place. So one thing you need to understand is that when you go from a smaller place to a greater place in our place value, it increases 10 times. Now the next thing that you need to understand, after understanding that when you go from the smaller to the greater place, each place is increasing by 10 times the amount. The other thing that you have to understand is that the exact opposite is true when you go from the greater place to the lesser place. You need to understand that when you go from a greater place to a lesser place, the place that you're looking at is 1/10 of the place to its left. 1/10 means the exact same thing as a number that is divided by 10. If we look at our place value chart here, we can see our example. If we look at our thousands block, which is representing our thousands place in terms of place value, if we take this 1,000 and we find 1/10 of 1,000, which means we're dividing it by 10, if we take 1,000 and divide it by 10, we get 100. So 1/10 of 1,000 equals 100, because we divide it by 10. If we look at our hundreds block, which is representing our hundreds place, we take this 100 and we find 1/10 of the 100, meaning we divide 100 divided by 10. If we take that 100 divided by 10, we get 10. So 10 is 1/10 of 100. And finally, looking at the tens place, if we find 1/10 of 10, which means we divide it by 10, we know 10 divided by 10 equals 1. So 1 is 1/10 of 10. That's something that you need to understand, is that 1/10 of means that you're dividing that number by 10. Okay, so knowing that, let's take a look at some examples here. Here we have an example that says 500 is 10 times as much as what? Well, we need to take a look at the 500, and we need to think about 500 is going to be 10 times as much as this number is right here. Alright, so whatever this number here, it has to be smaller than 500, because 500 is 10 times as much as this number. Alright, and if we take the number 50 and we multiply it by 10, alright, we know that 50 times 10 gets me 500. Therefore, 500 is 10 times as much as 50. Let's look at our second example here. I have 600 is 10 times as much as what? Well, 600 is 10 times as much as this number. So this number is going to be smaller than 600. And I know if I took 10 and I multiplied it by 60, I would get 600 as my answer. Therefore, 600 is 10 times as much as 60. Now here, let's look at this other example. It says 30 is 10 times as much as what? Once again, if this number is 10 times as much as this number, that means this number has to be smaller than 30. And I think to myself, 10 times what would get me 30? And I know, using my mental math and my multiples of 10, that if I took this 10 and I multiplied it by 3, I know that 30 is 10 times as much as 3. Alright, now look carefully at these examples, because these examples are the opposite of the ones that we just practiced. The first example here asks, 900 is 1/10 of what? So if this number here, 900, is 1/10, it's a fraction of this number, we know that this number has to be larger than 900. Okay, and I have to figure out, what would this number be? Well, if 900 is 1/10 of this number, and I had the number 9,000, I take that 9,000 and I divide it by 10, I would get 900. So 900 is going to be 1/10 of 9,000. I'll show you another example here. Here we have the number 80. 80 is 1/10 of this number. Well, 80 is going to be 1/10. It's only going to be part of whatever this number is. It's a part of this number. That's what a fraction is. It's a part of a whole. So 80 is 1/10 of this number. This number has to be larger than 80. Okay? And whatever this number is had to be divided by 10, because that's what 1/10 means. And if this number was divided by 10 and we got 80, I know from my rules of division of 10 that this number here had to have an extra 0 on the end. So I would write down my number 80 and I would add a 0 and I would get 800. Because if I took this 800 and I divided it by 10, meaning we found 1/10 of this number, I know my rules for division. 8 divided by this 1 is 8. We cancel this 0 with this 0, and we have 1 0 left. We add it to our answer. Therefore, 800 divided by 10 is 80, meaning 1/10 of 800 equals 80. And that's exactly what we have here. We have 80 is 1/10 of 800. Here's my final example. I have 7,000 is 1/10 of this number. So if 7,000 is 1/10 of this number, it must be a part of this number. This number here must be larger than this 7,000. And I have to think, well, if 7,000 is 1/10 of this number, then this number was divided by 10 to get 7,000. And again, knowing my rules, if I had the number 70,000, and if I divided that 70,000 by 10, I would get 7,000. If I divide it by 10, all I'm doing is I'm taking off that extra 0 on the end, and I'm left with 3 zeros, which would get me 7,000. Therefore, 7,000 is 1/10 of 70. So what I want you to do right now to finish up is I want you to press the pause button, and I want you to try these problems out here. And once you've completed the problems, press the play button to see if you got them right. Okay, so let's take a look at these now. We have 40 is 10 times as much as what? Well, I know if 40 is 10 times as much as this number has to be smaller. So I ask myself, well, what times 10 would get me 40? Okay, I know it has to have a 4 in it. And if I know that it has to have a 1 0 because I'm multiplying it by 10 when I get my answer. So if I took 40, if I took the number 4 here and I multiplied it by 10, I would get my answer of 40. Therefore, 40 is 10 times as much as 4. Let's take a look at this one here. 10 is 1/10 of this number here. So, this number here I know has to be larger than 10, because 10 is 1/10 of this number. It's only a part of this number. So if 10 is 1/10 of this number, I have to think, what divided by 10 would get me 10? I would take 100, and I would ask myself, 100 divided by 10, does that get me 10? And I know, of course, that it does. 100 divided by 10 gets me 10, so 10 is 1/10 of 100. And then finally here, we have 20,000 is 10 times as much as what? 20,000 is 10 times as much as this number. That means this number has to be smaller, because 20,000 is 10 times as much as this number. So I think, what times 10 gets me 20,000? And if I multiply a number by 10, I know it would have to have one extra zero in it. So if I had this 20,000, before it was multiplied by that 10, it must have only had 3 zeros. I write down the number 2,000, because I know that 2,000 times 10 equals 20,000. Therefore, 20,000 is 10 times as much as 2,000. I hope this clears this up for you. Please review this lesson as often as you need, and we need to make sure that the most important part is that you understand the relationship between the place values. And that relationship is, when we go from the smaller to the greater place, the value increases 10 times as much. And when we start from the greater place and we go to the lesser place, it is 1/10 of the place to its left, meaning it's divided by 10. Thank you, and let me know if you have any other questions in class.